Back with you tonight on In Focus. Early learning centers in the country may have to endure another year of hardship as administration transitions from the Department of Social Development to basic education unfold. The 2021 census revealed glaring gaps in funding while also exploring or even exposing shortcomings in the registration of at least 40% of learning centers. The census also found that only 33% of centers received subsidies from social development. Joining us now to discuss this is Professor Eric Atmore, Director at Center for Early Childhood Development at the University of Stellenbosch, and UNICEF's Education Specialist in Early Childhood Development, Andre Viviers. Good evening and thank you very much for your time this evening. Prof, let's start with you. The transition from social development into education, will it automatically improve resource allocation and oversight to ECD centers?
Thabo, good evening and good evening to your viewers. Look, it's very early. It's only 2 months and 1 week since the transition. And we've had mixed reports. In the Western Cape, it's going smoothly. All the staff have been transferred. The budgets have been transferred. The department has met with the non-profit sector. And I'm very, very hopeful for the Western Cape. However, reports we're getting from visits to the Eastern Cape and the Northern Cape indicates that it's a shambles. The staff don't know who's working in the education department. There are no officers, there's no technology, and there's very little happening. I also have reports that the subsidies, the ECD subsidy has not been paid in April or May month in the Lowveld, in the Gauteng district, and in parts of Limpopo. So it's a mixed bag. It is early days, but basic education, it could be a really good move if basic education gets its act together.
Yeah. Andre, why are we failing to map out this particular sector and have verifiable and solid data that helps us to be able to resource all equitably and not leave others behind in the context of that say?
Thank you and good evening to everybody. I wanted to reserve a little bit and say, and I don't want to put it out that we are failing the sector. I think what has happened in the sector over the past 25 years in South Africa is actually phenomenal, and it's not without challenges. And that is what we need to understand. I think one of the biggest things that we have to deal with is and that is why the recent census that have been published by the Department of Basic Education, that they have done with support from a number of organizations, and particularly the Lego Foundation, has for the first time actually gave us the very reliable numbers of what we are dealing with in the country. And I think you have referred to that earlier as well. Yeah, I think it is at that, against that backdrop that I also want to respond to say is we need to look at where it actually goes well and what happens and what we are sure about, but also in other areas, what are the challenges? And there are systemic challenges, and the systemic challenges might be within government, but I unfortunately must say it is also within the NGO sector and in the business sector. And I think that is the important thing that we need to look at, how collectively this would be resolved in various ways, including the issue of funding and all of that. And I think that is what makes this transitional process so important, and that everybody need to pull together to make sure that we get what is set out in the National Development Plan, that our early learning and development programs are part of our basic education system.
Yeah. So, talking of that, then what we're doing currently for a seamless transition of this handover of power, what needs to happen in a manner that ensures that the function of OCDs doesn't get hampered as we are changing how it is funded and where money is coming from? Andre, you can take that.
I think the first thing is, and I think that is, as Eric also have indicated, we are 2 months just more than 2 months into the transition. And I think one of the big things that we need to understand in this shift is that we move basically from a social protection paradigm where early childhood development was located for a very long time, or a child protection kind of paradigm, to a human capital and early learning and development paradigm. And that would bring about a big shift in terms of that. The other thing that is important, and I think one can look at it in various ways. On the one hand, one can look at what is the funding and the funding models that need to work in a pro-poor kind of manner, but also to make sure that our poorest children have access to early childhood development programs, which the census show that it is there, but our issue will remain, how do we ensure that we get quality early learning and development programs? And that is, there is no magic formula, there is no magic policy that can do that. The magic, if we want to call it magic, lies into solid human resources, well qualified early childhood development workforce in terms of practitioners and educators.
Good point, good point. And that's where I was segueing to next then, Prof. How do we approach the teacher development, right? There is, of course, further findings in the census that 52% of teaching staff in early training programs have relevant qualifications, while 22% have no qualifications.
Yes, Thabo, that 52% is slightly misleading, because included in that is the very, very modest level 4 ECD qualification. Now, that barely qualifies you to be an ECD teacher. So the real qualified teachers is a much smaller percentage. I think what bothers the sector is that whenever a teacher development program is produced by government, grade R teachers and ECD teachers are always excluded. If one looks at the various teacher training plans, we don't see early childhood development, we don't see grade R. So there needs to be a concerted training program to bring those teachers to a point where they can add value to young children. You know, level 4, without discounting its value, it's the equivalent of grade 12. So we really need a human resource plan for early childhood development. And I'm afraid we haven't had one since democracy in 1994, or we haven't had a reasonable and feasible one. And then there's the question of who offers those training courses. Very few universities offer graduate training in early childhood development. It's fallen onto the non-profit sector. And as Andre says, the non-profit sector has its own limitations, one around capacity and two around funding. So teacher training is probably the biggest challenge, alongside a proper funding formula for ECD and for grade R.
Yeah, the Minister of Basic Education saying the sector does not speak with one voice, in a sense, when it comes to this, and therefore limits government from getting the full scale of the issue, and therefore how to approach this question of teacher development. What do you say, Prof?
I think that is deflecting the issue. That's a nice way of government to avoid having to deal with early childhood development. You know, this concept of speaking with one voice, you've just had Floyd Chabamba on television. We've got about 40 political parties, and of which about 12 are in parliament. Nobody says they must speak with one voice, but government uses that to limit its commitment to implementing the National Integrated ECD policy. There will never be one voice. What if that one voice is incorrect or is misguided? It's the interrogation of different voices that produces the most optimal result. So I reject that out of hand. Various ministers of education and social development have used that over the years, but it's a red herring. It's a way of getting around doing their duty, and that is meeting the early childhood needs of young children.
Yeah. Two things, Andre, that needs to happen. You've already touched on one in terms of the professional development of the practitioners, but we also need to understand, they say, the power of play and to understand how to integrate it into what happens into childhood development. How do we approach that?
Can I just take one step back? And I think that is to the development of the ECD workforce and early childhood development or training for that. I think we should not see the training out of context of a wider system development that can absorb better qualified early childhood development educators and teachers. At this stage, the system that is there cannot absorb the sector better qualified people because of funding issues, because of where they are located, how their governance are structured, and all of those things. So we coincide with all of this is a wider sector reform. And then to come back to the second part, and I want to qualify it in a way to say, when we talk about early childhood development, that is the development phase in the early years. And if we talk about early learning and development, that is the activities that take place in the most simple terms that ensure that our young children develop, the brain development, the cognitive, physical development, and all of that. And if we need to understand the importance of play from birth, it is inherent to human development. It's inherent to brain development. And it is something that needs to happen at the home with parents, because nearly 60% currently of all our young children are at home with up to the age of 4, are at home with their parents. They in no other form of early learning and development program at all. Yeah. And parents can and have the ability to do that, and we should not dismiss that. But to understand that play happens on a spectrum, and the most simplest stimulation is important because it helps with brain development. It helps with all kinds of mathematical skills, pre-reading skills, and all of that. Just to give you a simple example, when we all know when the child goes at the age of 7 or 6 into school, one of the things that the teachers look at for school readiness is a simple thing like, is there a good pencil grip? Because the child needs to write and do things in the right way. Yeah. But that starts already when the baby plays with a rattle or with a stick or with a spoon, and where that small motor skills are being developed. And the simple thing that where children start to sort at the age of 2 shapes between triangles and squares are actually pre-mathematical skills. It is also skills that are important for reading, because reading is words are patterns, and we start to teach children very early through play about pattern, but also around things that they need to have like concentration. Concentration is not something that you suddenly have when you enter a classroom. It starts in very small, minute kind of activities where a child put 2 pieces of a puzzle together, or try to fit things together. And that is important. And if we just can understand that, parents need to play with their children at home and allow free play and allow a range of other things, but also in a structured way. And you don't necessarily need toys to do that. You can do it with all kinds of other stuff. But that scaffolds, it builds. And it is how we then move towards what we later on need to be good at mathematics, or to be good in language, or to be an entrepreneur. Right. And trial and error learning is actually one of the foundations of good entrepreneurship later. So I hope I get that message.
Got you. Got the message through loud and clear. Let's leave it there for tonight because of time. Andre Viviers, he's the UNICEF's education specialist. Also, Prof. Eric Atmore, appreciate your time from the University of Stellenbosch.